Let's get it started.
Double O.
Think like a rapper.
Check 1 2 1 2. This is Double O, and you are back with a new episode of Think Like a Rapper. We are here, trapped in quarantine again, retrapped, and I have an amazing friend on the podcast today. He is probably one of the last few, but most trustworthy sources and voices in hip hop. He's run one of the most powerful, culturally important, and maybe not even when he started it, but it's definitely turned into a linchpin of the online blogosphere for information and for just farm league for finding and discovering new talent. He is Andrew Barber of Fakeshoredrive. He refused to do the podcast on Zoom when we first asked him, and then I had to create a pandemic in order for him to come on. Andrew, how are you doing?
Well, thank you for the glowing intro. I appreciate that. I don't deserve it, but
no, there's more. There's more. He's also a manager. He also gets record deals. He's that guy.
But anyway, the pandemic thing, I was anti doing Zoom like podcasts or interviews because I didn't feel like you could get the actual, it didn't, something about it felt unorganic, and like I don't think you get the best conversations out of people, but now you can because everybody's used to it. I mean, this is just life now, so I think everybody's more comfortable on it, and it's proven that it works. So here we are. We made it happen.
Yeah. Is there, obviously you've made a name for yourself in the digital space. It's where you've cut your teeth. Is there anything like that you noticed maybe that you were when you first started and, even having conversations about blogs that you maybe got pushback from or people didn't think was real until the minute that everybody was on lockdown? Like, is there anything in terms of just even the people around you or in Chicago where all of a sudden it's just like, oh, that's what you were doing this whole time, or like, oh, it makes more sense now?
I mean, the digital space has changed so much. I mean, I think you remember the early days of Fakeshoredrive. You were around then.
Yeah.
Like it certainly wasn't like a cool thing to be a blogger or like an online person or personality. There weren't really there was kind of personalities then, but it was all about blogs and people weren't using really YouTube as a form of vlogging or podcasting at the time. There were podcasts, but like, I think people that were online doing it at the time were kind of viewed as like kind of nerdy people. So it wasn't like, I would say within the last 5 to 7 years, especially when people were able to get like blue checks out of it, that kind of people that did like journalism or online thing kind of came not celebs, but noteworthy in their own right. And then that's kind of when the game got flooded and more people started trying to do it. Maybe they weren't artists or they didn't want to be artists. They wanted, it was no longer like a nerdy thing to be a blogger or whatever. Yeah. And that was like probably the earliest pushback. I don't think people thought that was like a cool thing or a cool job to have. But, I think it's become a cool thing, and it's become a thing, that's been maybe a little too watered down. But, it's a good way for people to get their ideas out, I guess.
Yeah, you've been able to, when I said that in the intro, I meant it in terms of being one of the most trusted voices, I think, in hip hop still, and maintain a level of integrity through all of the iterations that you're talking about, right? Like a lot of people, you could argue that when it was much harder and when it was much less cool to be an online journalist, a blogger, or someone just commenting on the culture, it really took some balls to do so, whereas the people who following the trendsetters just have to edit some stuff on on iMovie and post it on YouTube.
Right.
But you've been able
I remember going to see you guys at like Rock the Bells or whatever, and there would be like no journalists there. There was like maybe me and RTP. That was it. Maybe like one other person but it wasn't like when you go somewhere now and there's like, you know, Twitter personalities, Instagram people, journalists, it's like it's become a whole thing. It was not that, at least not in Chicago at the time.
Yeah. So what made you? Let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the beginning. What's your first hip hop memory?
The Nightmare on My Street, DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. That was the first like rap song I really remember hearing. And that's when like Freddy Krueger was like all the rage back then. And once I heard, like, one of my older friends had that, and I heard it on cassette tape, and that's when I fell in love with rap. You know, I went out and got He's a DJ, I'm the Rapper cassette tape, and like they had Parents Just Don't Understand on it. And that was like my first, so it was like 87, 88, I can't remember exactly the year. I was like, you know, I was like 6, 7 years old at the time. I was still a child, you know. My kids are one of my oldest kids is almost that age now, so it's crazy to think about. But you know, that was like the gateway into it. Like then I started getting into Public Enemy and EPMD and NWA and Eazy-E and Too Short, and that was like the floodgates were open after that.
I've actually never asked anybody this question before, which is so weird considering my connection to Chicago. But during that era, was there something, was there media locally that was happening for like the Chicago scene at the time, like in New York?
There was, but I was in Indiana then. I was still in Indiana.
Oh, okay.
So, but there was like Flypaper, which was a big thing here, and then there was another thing that Jay Bird had. I can't remember the name, but there were Midwest publications, but they were very small and they were hard to get. Yeah. You know, that time it was still all about the Source. Like the Source was the only, and even you couldn't really even get the Source like in that time. It was like more early 90s is when you could kind of get the Source and Vibes at music stores and different places like that.
Yeah, I was having this conversation with Jason Rodriguez, and it's been this.
Shout out to him, the homie.
Shouts out to Jay, but it's been this weird sort of me reimagining, because we always have these conversations, and obviously you have, especially in the news as of late, like journalists versus rappers, and this way in which they're pitted adversaries intentionally. But Jay having grown up in Delaware, and then me, even though I started in Brooklyn, having to moving to Jersey during my formative years, that like so much of the culture as we perceive it and know it now, we learned through media.
Right. BT, MTV. Going to Raps and Rap City. That was it. That was all you could get.
And so I always wonder for journalists, do they, and this is the question to you is like, when you were starting Fakeshore and when you think about posting stories, do you see yourself in the chain, right? Like, in other words, there's this thing that's happening that's real. Then there is the filter through which it goes through that's going to be blasted out into the world. And that part of the chain, right? Like if you had been at the Source, or if you had been at Double XL or Vibe or wherever early on, it's very cognizant that like, this is the way in which the culture is going to be represented. So I have to do it in a certain way. Are you thinking about that when it came to Fakeshore? You know, that it's not just simply like, oh, I'm just reporting this, but like there's a way in which there's a ethics, I guess, built behind it.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an ethics behind it. And then, you got to take into consideration, I'm a white guy, so like you always got to be cognizant of that. I think a lot of times, especially now, people just kind of jump in and don't think about, there was rules. It was always like, all right, man, like in high school, there's different tables. Like there's the jocks, and then there's the cool kids, and then maybe the cheerleaders, and then maybe the goth kids, and there's like a hip hop table. And it's like the hip hop table, if you want to sit at the hip hop table and you were a white guy, like you had to be like the expert. You had to know everything. Like you couldn't just be a poser. It was like you could come around and we're welcoming, but like you can't just be, this is no fringe. Like you have to be in it.
Yeah. And
are you in it? And like I think maybe a lot of people necessarily weren't in it like that or didn't treat it like that. So it was always like being very cognizant and be respectful of the art form. I think that was also important. Like, make sure what you're doing is respectful of the art form and shows love to the people that came before you. And as you see, like, I show love to everything that influenced me and all the people that came before me, because I feel like as the years go on, it's like we only talk about like the same 5 to 10 rappers from previous eras. So I want to make sure that I show love to all the different artists and people that came before me that paved the way, because even now, like, it's easier for people to do stuff than even we had it 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And so and think how hard it was 15 years before that. We were able to reap benefits that people that came before us maybe necessary. And it was a lot harder then. And now it's like people can just upload anything. So there's like, it always changes so much. And like I just wanted to make it a point to show love to the people that blazed the trail or came before me. What
made you throw your hat in the ring? We're going from obviously a fan and being respectful of the culture to saying like, okay, I want to be a part of it in this way. What made you start Fakeshored?
So it was kind of my dream was to always work in the music business, right? Okay. I was more into the execs and the A&R side than I was I never wanted to be an artist myself. I always was more fascinated with how do I break an artist.
Did you try and fail though, or was it like you go through the?
When I was in college, you couldn't see now people, and maybe it's not easier, but like you could just hit somebody on a DM and they might respond to you. You could at somebody on Twitter and they might respond to you.
Yeah.
Like back then, the best way you could find somebody was, unless you were in New York, where the whole industry wasn't, like, to some extent LA as well, but like you could find the phone number or fax number on the back of a CD. That was like how you had to try to reach out to a label. And so I used to fax my resume to every record label, even for a campus rep position, anything. Never got a response. I think the furthest I got was I ran into P.D. Pablo one time, and I was like, yo, can I have an internship? Can you help me get an internship at Jive? And he was like, what's an internship? Like, he had no idea what I was talking about. He gave me somebody's number, and they answered, and we spoke, but it didn't really go anywhere. But, like, it wasn't easy back then to find your way in. You had to have a connect, or you needed to be kind of in New York or whatever. And I wasn't there. I was in Chicago. And I was working a corporate job that I didn't love. It was cool, but it wasn't what I dreamed of doing. My heart was still trying to get in the music business. At the same time of this is when the blog, the blog world was kind of taking form. Some of the early bloggers were like Byron Crawford and Knob.
That. I gotta go find him one day and interview him, because I was definitely like, number one, he's had some hilarious reviews and just hilarious, like, him and Knowledge used to have random beefs, and it was, but yeah, like so Combat Jack,
Right. Yeah. Remember, I was thinking about this the other day when he did like there was that big controversy about who had that, the beat that you, Jay-Z, and whoever else had at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think he had it too. Like, you all three had that beat who else had that beat?
It was Show Me What You Got. It was also on our first album, and then it was also that Diddy album that came out.
It was on Press Play.
Yeah, exactly.
He always was posting about that. Anyway, that's another conversation. So I was reading those blogs, and at the same time, I was going to shows and events and concerts and stuff like every night in Chicago, and I felt like there was this really burgeoning scene here that nobody was covering. Unless you were one of the big four at the time, you were getting like no blog coverage. Yeah. And blogs were really starting to take over. Those were becoming like, even Elliot Wilson, like he was early with putting that blog team together on Double XL where they had their own blogs. Like, he was maybe the first like big conglomerate to embrace that, which was cool. And I'm like, well, I was reading people and I'm like, well, I know as much as these people. Like, I think that I could, at least throw my hat in the ring and, give some information, maybe a different side of things. And, at the same time, Chicago's having all the, unless you were Lupe Common, Twista, or Kanye, you weren't getting love on the blogs yet.
Yeah.
You guys would get some mentions. The cool kids would get some mentions here and there. But I was like seeing all you guys, and I'm like, yo, this is interesting. This should be getting more coverage. You know, Mano and what Hollywood Holt and Mike Terre and what they were doing, even like Bump J and Nikki Halstead. Like there was all this GLC, there was all this cool stuff happening in Chicago, and nobody was covering it. So that's kind of how I got the idea. I'm like, somebody needs to be covering what's happening in Chicago, and it just kind of started from there.
And then you just became the voice. You became
I mean, and shout out, you know, Ruby Hornet was
100%.
Alex and Virgil were around then doing it. You know, Go Wear Hip Hop. Other blogs started popping up, and like it kind of became a thing where, you know, there was artists and then people writing about it, which was cool because it started to build somewhat of an industry here. Like,
but I definitely think that you, though, were very smart about, I wouldn't call it a pivot, but when the other burgeoning scenes, when the drill scene started to bubble in Chicago, and obviously what like LEP Bogus Boys was doing, and Doe, and like there, it seemed like there was a way in which you broke away from the pack by being inclusive of not simply just like, oh, here's this cool sort of blog era throwback, but you know, whatever you want to consider us and the cool kids and, you know, like everybody that we just rattled off. But then as the new era started coming, Fakeshoredrive definitely became like the place where, at least for me, the drill scene was, you know, that and the YouTube of the music directors, that was kind of the places where it really burgeoned.
Yeah. And then you had, on the other hand, you had the drill, and then on the other hand, you had like the Save Money stuff, and you had Vic and Chance and you know, everything that was happening there, and adjacent to it, like Mick Jenkins and Saba, and then G Herbo and Bibby. There was just a lot of stuff, and at the time, like outside publications weren't like necessarily paying it. They were paying attention, but not in a way that that you would think. Like people had their ear to the ground, but it was still like much more focused on the coast in Atlanta. And Chicago still, I don't think, had gotten the respect it deserved until around then. And then people saw the power of what was happening around 2012, 2013. And then, you know, everybody, you know, came and then everything just kind of took off. And then technology started moving quicker and quicker. And, you know, our beloved blog era kind of went away.
What do you think? Chicago is this really unique space that I've always been jealous of, because it is such a strong cultural magnet, right? It's this place, not necessarily an island, but because of where it's situated, I feel like its reach might be much broader than some other major cities, which is why, you know, to me, scaling happens a little bit easier. Like, when you were watching these drill videos, and I don't know the analytics behind it, but I'd actually be curious if you do, when you'd see these things that like running 1 million, 2 million, 3 million plays, I always looked at it as like, this is the benefit of coming from the Midwest, because the reach is so broad, right? Like you can go deep into whether it be Michigan or deep downstate Illinois, where all these people who are craving for something to kind of hold on to, and the closest place they can sort of hold on to is Chicago. And
right, I mean, it's the capital, you know, it's like the capital of the Midwest.
Yeah.
Like every kind of market in the Midwest, like has a different, you know, they're all within like, you know, 5 hours or whatever of each other, drive 3 hours, whatever. Some may be a little longer, but like they have completely different scenes. So like Chicago's nothing like Detroit. Like those scenes couldn't be more different. Like there's like Detroit probably has more in common with like the sound of the Bay than it does the sound of Chicago. So that was always like interesting. So there was different, but Chicago is like the capital of the Midwest. You know, it's the biggest city, and there's so many people here. So that's what always like confused me about like, why weren't artists here getting more coverage with this being the third largest city in the United States? It always like just blew my mind. It was like, why aren't there more artists that are getting a big push from here?
Why do you think that there isn't a bigger industry presence in Chicago, being that it's, let's just be real, since before, but definitely if we can say basically come sort of like Kanye resurgence on has been indicative, has been probably the most important cultural trend-setting city outside of Atlanta over the last almost 20 years now.
Yeah.
But it always feels like there's still there still isn't enough industry in Chicago. Like there isn't really like the majors aren't opening up 300-400 person shops in Chicago and just,
or even like a 5-person shop. Like the only label people here are like radio reps. That's it. Some of them don't even live in Chicago. They're Midwest reps, but they live elsewhere. But yeah, I don't know. It's always been weird to me that there was never an investment in Chicago. It was more like, all right, let's grab the talent and get them out of here. Let's grab them, take them to LA. Let's take them to New York. You know, at least on the industry side.
Yeah.
Because it's easier. It's cheaper to do that than to like, you know, build, you know, a facility here or really invest into the community here. I wish I had a better answer for that. It's crazy, but it just seems like they wanted to, you know, it's been more of a brain drain.
Yeah, and it's weird because it happens every time. It's like the first time that they saw it happen with Kanye, there should have been a and to be fair, I think John Monopoly did make sort of a bit of an attempt to do it with Hustle, where he's just like,
absolutely,
let's go set up in
100%.
Chicago, because you know everybody that when we first signed, everybody that I met, all these names all came basically were circling around the Hustle period sphere. You know, Mano and Holt and Mike Terra, and you know John was the first person to introduce us to the cool kids, right? Like these. He knew and was tapped into everything that was sort of happening at the time. And it's weird that
he still is. Like, Monopoly is still very tapped into all that stuff. But like Hustle was like the gold standard. Like if you could get down, like when Knowledge got down with Hustle, like that was a stamp. Like getting down with Hustle period was like the shit.
Yeah. It's just weird that but again, this might just be a larger issue with the music industry that I sometimes have, where it keeps making these same mistakes when it's like it's so obvious.
They're trying to protect their, you know, set interests.
Yeah, and it's so weird because it's just like, look, just give you you know, give you $100 million and just open up an Interscope office.
And you would think that they could, or just, all right, let's do something Midwest, like let's do a whatever Atlantic Midwest, or you know, not to single them out, but like, you know, especially when they saw that those kids, a lot of those younger kids, like the Chances and the Keefs and, you know, all those other, you know, guys that happened around 2012, 2013, they weren't waiting on the industry. They were not waiting for necessarily gatekeep. They were putting up their music themselves. Yeah. You know, they didn't look at like maybe how our age group was like, man, we need to have a video on BT. We need to have our video on MTV. You know, we got to get our song on the radio. These dudes were like, fuck it. We're just putting it out there and see what happens. And they were just right on time with that.
Yeah. Now you have evolved from obviously just reporting on the culture to get to managing artists, getting record deals. But you got a major label deal in the midst of this sort of quest for everybody to just do it themselves independently and scale themselves. And so what was behind that decision for you guys with Valee to say, okay, we've started this flame, but now we're going to go over here and maybe go what people might consider a more traditional route?
Yeah, I mean, that was still 2.5, 3 years ago when he signed over at Good, Def Jam. So it wasn't as fully formed and maybe as easy as it is even now. Like the technology has even moved so much faster 3 years ago than it has now. You know, if you have the opportunity to work with somebody like Kanye, you know, at that time, Good Music, a full staff, a support system, Monop was over there. Monop was just getting back with good music. And there was kind of a new regime at Def Jam as well, some new energy over there. It just seemed like a good move. You know, every artist situation is different. There are some artists that want to be, you know, that have their own money and don't care about doing the legwork and doing all the extra and investing and doing, because being an independent artist is hard. Like, it's definitely harder than being a major label artist, but if you do it right on the indie scale, you can reap more of the benefits, right?
Yeah.
From selling the music or getting the music streams. Each are good for different artists. So it's like, in management, you have to kind of do what's best for your artists and what they want to do. Like what's going to give them a better chance of becoming, a successful, artist. And I think sometimes people have a different definition of what success is. Like, do you want to become try to be an A-list or B-list star, or do you just want to make a great living doing art, making music, doing what you love? Because to me, but if you could make a living just being a musician or working in music, you've already won. That's what most people aspire to do, but still so few will ever actually be able to do. So I think it depends on the artist and what their aspirations are, and that just felt like the right move at the time.
Yeah, I think having been essentially independent our entire career, having teased major label deals, I'm always push back a little bit on the people who always shout independent from day one forever, without adding in sort of the context where it's just like, yeah, you can do it, but if you don't have any money, if you don't have a team, if you don't have resources, connections, that's going to be, it's already a near impossible thing to sort of thread. But even if you make great music, it's still such a hard, slog to cut through billions of tracks that are released, yearly on, and just get noticed. That,
right.
That the major labels still offer, even if it's, it's weird because it's like, even if it's just the look you get when you get the first announcement, right? Where people are going to be like, oh, so so-and-so signed with so-and-so, okay. You're going to listen to the first record or the second record, whatever. But that may be enough to cut through the clutter. And I think for young artists, it's always smart to just make sure you're really weighing those options and opportunities. Right. I think you can speak to what it's like being in a major label deal, right? They're not going to save you. You still have a shit ton of work to do by yourself.
Yeah. And they expect a lot of you. It's not like you just get over there and like, all right, I'm done. Like, I just give them the mute. No, it's like you're expected to, they're going to ask you to do X, Y, and Z. Some of it's going to be corny. Some of it may not be, but like, it's a job then. Like, getting the deal is not the easy part, but it's kind of an easy part of it. It's everything else that comes because, not only are you going to have to still be doing what you were doing before then, but you're going to have to do more. You're going to have to do maybe a promo tour. You're going to have to do, stuff that you don't want to do. Go do press, go do media training, go do, a lot of different things that they will require of you because they've invested, a lot of money on you. They want to make that money back. They didn't just get these skyscrapers by accident. Like they, but I do think now, like if you are able to catch a buzz, like, artists always ask me, what do you think I should do? Should I be indie or should I go to a major? And I'm like, well, number one, you need to figure out what your aspirations are and how much of yourself are you willing to give up in order to do that? Yeah. Because you can't just do whatever when you're on a major, unless you're like, an A-lister, and even still, then they will. You can't just do anything that you want. You could probably have more creative control, but when you go in for the deal, and I've seen this happen with so many artists. They tell you everything that you want to hear. They're going to tell you, oh, you can do whatever you want. We're not going to stifle your creativity. We're not going to stop any of that. You can make the music that you want to make. We're all about artists. And you have this A&R that signs you and tells you X, Y, and Z, but then, 6 months later, that A&R is gone. That A&R has been fired or has been poached by another label. They're gone, and you're kind of stuck in the building by yourself with nobody really helping you. There's been a change in the guard there, and you know, that's a gamble that you have to take because that can happen. But it's
like talk about that a little bit, because as a manager, that's probably, you know, when you do decide to jump into the major label space, that's probably one of the most important things that you have to continue to do is like, what do you do to make sure you're maintaining those relationships in general in the building, so that if there is a change in personnel, which there almost always
there
is,
always is, and it's like
that you're still good.
It could be a whole new staff. So it's
how do you manage those transitions though?
I mean, you want to try to maintain as many friendships or at least relationships in the building as you can. Try to get out in front of it, email, hey, introduce me to this person, or get it, just be visible. Like, sometimes there's people that will go to a city and not even stop by and see the label, or, I think if you're on a major label, you have to stay in front of them because they have so many artists that they're worried about. And, I think a lot of times artists are, get on a label and they feel, well, nobody's hurt, but they don't realize that there's a lot of hidden costs that go into breaking an artist, and there's limited manpower. It's not like they, every person is working 20 projects at any given time. They're working a ton of different things. There's a lot of balls in the air. So like they only have X amount of time for you. And if you're not easy to work with, or you're not delivering results, they're not, you have very limited amount of time and resources then.
Yeah. Is there any advice that you've gotten from veteran managers that you've come into contact with, or just veteran people in the industry that you apply to how you manage?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you always want to speak to people before you and like try to figure out like, okay, what kind of mistakes did they make that they can help you. And I think that type of information is always underrated. And like I always try to pick people's brains that have been successful or unsuccessful before me. Like, why did this fall apart? That's why I do so much research and like studying things that happened in the past. So like maybe I don't make those same mistakes. But then there's certain things that are out of your control. Who could control a global pandemic coming in the middle of somebody's career? That's why I would feel awful for an artist that had a decent buzz, not like skyrocketing, but they signed a deal right before this happens. Now what do you do? Like, you can't go out and promote yourself. You can't do any shows. And what you can do right now is limited. But like, I had somebody tell me early on, like, yo, man, if you're going to be on a major, make sure you take care of the people at the label. Buy them lunch, send pizzas in, or, just be cool and be respectful of everybody. And that's kind of how I've always just moved in my career. Always like be nice, be, diligent, on time, punctual, and, do good business with people. And I think that transcends just management. That's just, how you should be as a human and survive in this business, because you and I have both seen people that come in, they get super hot, they start becoming assholes to people, and they become everything that they said they weren't going to become. I'll never be an industry person. And they get in there and they become that industry person.
Very industry, yeah.
And then, they're out before you know it. And then they burn every bridge behind them. Then what do you do?
Yeah. I mean, they're always, there's something that Erykah Badu said that I thought I always like to repeat, which is, as long as you can always be of service in this game, you always have a place to be. But to add to that, it's still right. Like you need to always I would say operate from a sense of, hey, gratitude for even having the opportunity to even be in the space. Like you said, I always say this to people, that I've won the lottery multiple times over, right? Like, I'm not supposed to have been these odds every time. The one in, however, yeah.
I mean, this is not easy to maintain. You guys have been in 15 years. I've been around almost 15 years at this point. Like, it's hard because you constantly have to be reinventing yourself or moving on to the next thing and pivoting and doing this and doing that. And like, it's not like I have one job. I got like 20 jobs that account for one salary. Like, this is not for the the weak at heart, like this is difficult. This is hard. Like the music industry is a very hard, and it's like easy to get your feelings hurt and get wrapped up in that. And like, you know, you got to be, you know, doing other things always.
Yeah. From, you know, because of all this stuff that's happened over the last couple months, and there's, you know, this idea for change from the music industry. Do you, if you were given the keys to the whole thing, what would you sort of change moving forward, outside, you know, past 2020, that would maybe make it not either not as hard or just not as weird and arbitrary as it
I mean, number one, I would hire way more Black executives. I would have way more Black people in places of power within, you know, I've been in so many different labels and so many different meetings, and it's like, you know, I expect to, when I walk in, that I would be like the only white person in the room, but then I'm like, no, it's all white people in the room, and it definitely should not be that. Yeah. You know, I take issue with that. And I think there needs to be definitely more Black executives in power and in charge and A&R and I mean, you could be anybody and be an A&R, but like people that really are from, you know, the culture and have grown up in it. I think that would be important. You know, I think that artists should be treated a little fairly, you know, like how does an artist make money right now? It's not like we're getting stimulus packages from the label. Like, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that right now. Okay. You know, here's some money maybe, or some kind of help to get by. Like, I'm not going to get anything like that. And I also think there needs to be a lot of, you know, change in the way some of these deals are structured, because the deals are, to me, unfair. Like, I get that 360 deals were a thing 10 years ago when the industry was completely tanking and labels were on the verge of closing their doors. But now there's a lot of money in the game again. Yeah. And while we're probably not making as much as they did in 99 or 2000 or whatever, which was the height of the music business when, you know, it was making more money than ever in the course of history, they're going to be there soon. Yeah. And they have all these catalogs, and the catalogs is what's going to make a lot of the money forever, because it's not a one-time purchase. You know, CD, you know, even though it's a fraction of a penny or whatever, like these things are going to be streamed in perpetuity, like forever and ever and ever. The catalogs are going to make so much money. That's why you'll never see labels ever go away, because they control those catalogs. Yeah. But like, I think the artist should get a better royalty rate. And then after a certain amount of years, like they should be able to get more points on their albums, if not, you know, get their masters back. Like, there's no reason an artist like that dropped the album in 94 that sold a lot of records should be destitute now and still a slave, if you will, to that old contract. That's unfair. Those things should be changed. There needs to be, you know, ratifications or whatever to some of these old deals, like, you know, especially because streaming wasn't in the language when they signed those deals years ago. You know, I would love to see 360s taken away.
Yeah, I'm you know, and I think we actually talked about this backstage. I'm always so weird with the 360, because if it was 360 the way that the original 360 label, Disney, envisioned it, to me, it's perfect, right? Like, not perfect, but if the labels operated the way Disney operated, where they were like, you're going to get this TV show, you're going to get dolls, we can manufacture, you know, you're going to get the record label, and you're going to go on tour, and then we're going to do malls, and we're going to do merch. But they have the facilities and the capacity to do it all. Then it kind of makes sense. But yeah, now we're in such this weird space, and I don't even know what's going to happen after this. I'd actually love to get your take on what you think the next 2 years of the music industry is going to be like.
Well, before I jump into that, I will say it's like, also, like, if you buy a house or whatever, and you know, you have a mortgage, like after a certain time, like you pay it off, like you
exactly.
own it. Yeah. You know what I mean? There should be a point of when you could own maybe something outright, or at least have a better partnership. Like, I think there needs to be more partnerships, and not like some of these bullshit JV deals that they offer people, where they're basically just glorified A&R job. where it's like, okay, we'll give you a year JV record deal where you can sign your own artist. But if we want to do away with your JV label in a year or two, we can, but we get to retain all your artists.
Yeah.
Like there needs to be changes in these type of things in languages. But anyway, I do think.
I feel like, just real quick, I feel like they need to look like a lot of indie deals. I think there are spaces where indie deals they've been doing, all my deals were essentially 50-50 splits at all these indie places. And it just makes so much more sense.
It makes everybody happier. It makes the artists happier, because you could be on a major and be a platinum selling artist and still not see a dime of your royalties until you recoup on everything.
Exactly.
Recoup on your deal, and then recoup on all the money they spent elsewhere.
Yeah.
But you may never.
Yeah. I mean,
that's why I think a lot of these indie deals are way more appetite, but you got to put in a lot more legwork.
Yeah, and there's not enough money sometimes to scale it to the place where you want to, which is kind of where the trade-off is. You might get it's the difference between a $15,000 advance to be a 50-50 versus a couple hundred to a couple million, and
But that money can be gone quick. But if you got that, that smaller advance, and they're not tapping your merch, they're not tapping your touring, they're not tapping any of your other, supplementary incomes. Like you could be good. Like I've heard Mozzie, I heard, he's on Empire, and that dude clears a lot of money just by being an indie artist and having a core fan base that supports him. Yeah. Obviously that's the exception, not the rule, but I do think you'll see more artists moving in that direction, or having deals structured maybe more similar to what West Side Gun or the Griselda guys have. Because I don't know the ins and outs of how their deals are structured, but I'm fascinated on how they're able to have relationships on major labels or be signed to majors, but still drop independently when they want to. I think that is a freedom that is unheard of. And I think that model would make it maybe more appetizing for people to be like, oh yeah, I'd take a major deal as long as I have the opportunity to continue to release music. Because it's a lot of times artists will spend all the, they'll get themselves hot. They don't have help from anybody. It's the artist, the producer, the manager, and a small team, and they create all this momentum and synergy on their own, and they get going. Then all of a sudden it's all the labels are calling. You're flying here to meet with XYZ, you're flying here, and then it's you finally get that deal, and then it's that momentum stops. Yeah. It's they just slow it down because you can't move as fast when you're on a major. Nope. Or you got to go through Sony or UMG or Warner, and there's all these different, there's legal and there's all of this different stuff that slows you down. And then you got, instead of, your team of 3 people having to decide on the music or what you're going to do with it, now you got a team of 50 people that it's got to go through, and this person wants to justify their position. So they're talking, and there's just so many cooks in the kitchen. So it slows you down. I think what Griselda has done has been remarkable, because while they took a deal, they were able to continue to build their catalog and build a fan base by dropping stuff every couple months.
And quality stuff. That's the most important thing. It's not simply just the frequency, but it's that they are able to also create quality at a high speed, which I think is you can structure any deal in the world you want. You can, be the coolest person on Instagram and all of that, but if the music doesn't cut through, the shit doesn't matter.
Right. At the end of the day, we're all here because of the music.
Yeah.
It's all about the music. So all the smoke and mirrors and the sheen and the glitz and the glamour, it doesn't matter if the music isn't good. Those gimmicks can only last so long. That's why you see these artists that have these crazy gimmicks. They go up, and then, for the most part, a few years later, nobody cares. They're on to the next, gimmick. And it's been the artists that have actual skill or substance or actual put meaning into their craft and have quality music that lasts longer, that have longer careers.
Yeah. So I would love for you to answer this question from two parts. it's an expansion of what I was asking before I cut you off, which was, what do you think the music industry looks like in 2 years or over the next 2 years? From the industry side, right? How we're going to make money, how we're going to figure our way out through potentially not touring for a long time. And then B, from an artist standpoint, how this state of the world maybe affects the kind of music that's going to be made.
Yeah. So to answer your first part, like, I don't really know. I hope it's not just, hey, we're relying on you to be good at social media now. So you see, like, artists were getting pressure to be like on social media when this pandemic first happened, we were all stuck inside. I mean, you would get on your Instagram and your whole top row, everybody was on live. And it was like, okay, that's not going to work because people are going to get tired of that real quick. And not everybody has, interesting content. I think a lot of times the labels are pressuring artists to be good at social media. They already expect you, your social media is a big part of your marketing. Mm-hmm. They rely on that heavily. So I think, you got to be good at social media but that shouldn't be it. Like I said, at the end of the day, it's all about the music. Yeah. And I think artists need to be able to continue to release music that maybe aren't held to necessarily the standards of, days past, where it was like, all right, it's all about your first week numbers. It's all about where you debut on the charts. Like, you have to stay visible and, figure out a way to stay in the conversation, but not be putting out bullshit or not be annoying about it. So you got to find that balance. And, like, who wants to watch an at-home concert? Not a lot of people do. Yeah, they're going to have to pivot to that. Yeah. And there has to be, we're going to have to get used to some of that. And maybe some people do want to see that. But, I don't really know.
What did you think about the BET Awards this year?
It would, the ratings were great. Now, I don't know if that's an indication of because everybody is trapped at home, so they have to watch it. It didn't have any award show that's like that. I think they did a good job. Yeah. It's probably the gold standard for what you can pull off in something like that, but it doesn't ever feel the same. Yeah. Like, it doesn't feel like an award show. Like when you're watching the BET Awards and it's like you hear the roar of the crowd and you see the people in the audience. Like, that's part of an award show, is like seeing who's sitting next to who and, who's up dancing and clapping when, who's presenting. Like, that's such a big part of it. If we were to do that for the next 5 years, would it still be a ratings killer? I don't know. Yeah. But we're going to have to adapt and we have to keep pushing forward. But what is it going to be? Who knows?
Drive-in, Walmart drive-in theater concerts. I don't know if you saw, they just partnered with with a movie house to turn their parking lots.
Walmart?
Walmart.
Wow.
Yeah, to turn parking lots into drive-ins.
I mean, that's a smart thing. I'm not sure that I would be, I know that they're starting to do those drive-in concerts, and I think it's a cool idea, but, is that going to move the needle? I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, it's with the pressure of figuring it out, obviously, because at the end of the day, this is a money thing. I think the industry will figure it out because they're just going to have to be like, okay, we have to, whatever weird idea that somebody had come up with that was in like a dusty basement, they're like, that'll never work. It's about to get a new look. And she's like, well, maybe
something we you would never thought possible 3 years ago is now like could be a reality. Yeah. And I think, artists should at this time build catalog, and try things and put out music. And I think people want to hear a certain type of music right now. I don't think singles are necessarily it. While singles can take off, like, I'm not going to go and just listen to one song from an artist. Like, right now, they drop a song, I'm not going to, I got to hear this new song. It's like, no, I want to go listen to a full project. I want to sit with 7 to 10 songs and get to know this artist. And I think music discovery should be, in a good place. But also I've heard where people are more into their comfort zone right now. They want to hear stuff that makes them feel good, that makes them think about a better time when they were outside, and maybe stuff that they came out when they were in high school or college or middle school, like that gives them a better feeling. I've also heard that.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was talking on the podcast last week with Justin Hunt, and we were talking about the rise of DJs, right, in general, kind of like through the virtual space now becoming the purveyors of culture again, right, which is really weird to think about. They started it when it was all live, and now they are here to
they saved us, man, like that. In the verse, like the DJ, that's the essence of hip hop. Whether you believe in the four core, whatever, like that's part of it. And the battle is also like the essence of that. So that's why the versus thing has been so successful. Yeah,
but like you said, but they're seeped in nostalgia, right? Like they are what's there. It's not like new music is really, although there've been a couple singles that have dropped through it, like people are listening to it because, like you said, there is a familiarity with the records, with the DJ sets, with the spaces. You're not hearing, there's not a lot of conversation about, Trolls, for instance, the Nicki and Daniel Hernandez record. We're not calling him by his, refuse to call him by his other name. It was what, number one, and then in 2 weeks it dropped out of the top 200. Right.
The fact to fall off, I think a number one record has ever had in the history.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Versus and D Nice are doing six-figure merch sales off of simply turning on Instagram Live and just going live for every other night or whatever. It seems like there is this may come back to figuring out a way to monetize off of catalog, for the music industry. I'm sure it's been beneficial for some of the artists, but
again, the industry shoots itself in the foot by stopping these people from live DJing. It's like, God, they can't help themselves because they don't have a publishing deal in place and they don't own this. It's like, guys, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Like, it's gonna draw people back to their catalog elsewhere. Like they're gonna just because they hear a snippet of it, a verse of it on a versus battle, doesn't mean that they're not gonna go restream the catalog. And I bet, I haven't seen the figures, but I guarantee after every one of these verses, the Spotify and Apple Music and Tidal numbers rise for all those catalogs.
Yeah.
Why are we shooting ourselves in the foot to try to punish these DJs and people for playing this music? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I always blame the music industry for it, but I do wonder if it's still this. I wouldn't be surprised if it's partially them, but also partially the tech companies that make money off of music still not respecting it in the way that they should have as the cultural importance that it holds, even though it's their business model, right? They aren't always willing to cut these deals that are necessary to make copyright just ubiquitous, right?
Right.
Like it should almost be
like Twitter won't do the deals with the big three and whatever. That's why all these people accounts get deleted and they get these DMCA notices, and videos disappear and things disappear because like the labels are killing them because Twitter won't do a deal with them.
Yeah, and somewhere it needs to change. But I won't keep you too long because I know you have very fun, important things to do. But I just have one last two questions. Biggie at number 10 on your list. If you don't know, at 7:14 a.m. on June 29th, you found a list that you had written in 1997.
Yes.
First off, amazing handwriting, right?
You like that?
It's like good. Like you definitely, it's definitely rap.
It's definitely rap handwriting, graffiti style.
Exactly.
You know what that writing is.
No, exactly, yeah. But yeah, Biggie at 10. Obviously, Tupac number 1. Okay, we get that. But Biggie at 10, and then Nas at 11.
See, here's the thing. Like I said in the tweet, I don't have context for this list. I do think those were probably my favorite artists at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it could have been everything. It could have been, hey, I'm waiting on these albums from these people. But that doesn't really make any sense. Maybe I thought these were the best lyricists at the time, but Silk the Shockers on it, so that negates that. I wish I had more context, but I'm so glad that I found that list because, when you think about, you think about what your list would be in 1997. You probably wouldn't. You might have a few of those people, but overall, you wouldn't have said that you would have all these artists on there.
Yeah.
But so you try to get back in your head. So maybe I was still mad at Biggie, and because I was so pro Tupac at the time. But Biggie had just died, and that was like my favorite album.
Yeah.
Life After Death was one of my favorite albums. But like, why wasn't Scarface on that list? I was big into Scarface at that time. Why wasn't Snoop on there? But I guess Snoop, had the Dogfather out at the time. Maybe I didn't.
Yeah.
So I have so many questions I wish I could go back in time and ask myself about that list. But overall, it's a pretty solid, it's an interesting list.
It's a solid list. What I love about it, though, and this is something that my list would not have looked like from 97. 97 was my freshman year of college. And I remember that summer, the arguments with like the new homies, all the homies that I met from LA, because it was just like, it was East Coast or it was West Coast, and there was nothing in between.
Right.
It was, like we were not, I don't even think I had listened to anything other than Tupac singles at that point and then him becoming on road trips, becoming one of my favorite artists because, there was only a few double albums at that time that you could listen to anyway.
Right.
But no, I do.
It's just a funny ass list.
But but even in 97, already having Jay there, in your top 20.
That's the most impressive thing is that I had Jay on that list in 90. That was pre volume 1.
Yeah, no, and it wouldn't be really until volume 1 that I think everyone starts paying attention. And
volume 2.
Oh, well, it was the transition. To me, it was the VHS of
Streets is Watching.
Streets is Watching, exactly.
That was it. You're right.
And that was because what they did then was give you a glimpse into the culture, the idea, everything that Rockefeller was doing. And then at that point you had to make a decision of like, oh, I'm invested in this, in the world that was just created. Even as haphazard as that whole movie was, like, there was just, you needed that visual component. And Dame was so smart about creating that because it created, I think, that was where the folklore of Rockefeller really solidifies. Because that was a VHS tape that I think I watched like every other day.
When you watch it now, it's pretty cringe, but back then it was like the coolest thing ever, right? And it was like at that same time that came out, the Streets is Watching soundtrack came out, which was really dope.
Yeah.
And then that's the summer that he had like 4 records going crazy at the same time. He had like It's All Right, Money Ain't a Thing, Hard Knock Life, and what was the other one? Can I Get a? All ringing off at the same, and that was when he exploded. Like that's when Jay took off. So to have it in summer '97, like people that would say that they, like a lot of people claim that they were listening to Jay in like '96, '97, but a lot of people are lying about that.
Yeah, no, most people would have heard the first single because that was what not the Dr. Dolittle soundtrack. What was it? The Nutty Professor soundtrack, right?
Which for which one?
I can't, for whatever reason, I can't remember names of anything right now. It was him and Foxy.
Oh, yeah, that was it. Yeah. Ain't No.
Yeah, Ain't No.
Yeah, everybody heard that record, but that was on the soundtrack for Nutty Professor. You're right.
That's a whole other conversation, but we often forget the importance of these ancillary ways in which we found stuff. It wasn't always the album, right? Like sometimes it was this weird way where you saw this thing and you're like, what's that? Okay, I'll buy in.
Think about all the weird soundtracks we were buying back then.
Amazing. I mean, the show soundtrack, all the movie soundtracks. They're classic. The 90s was, this is always weird because we can look back at in terms of nostalgia, but this is always weird. Like, that the record labels weren't doing it because they were smart. They were doing it because it was a money-making thing.
Yeah, right.
But they were I
and
think
the movie studios would pay for the videos and pay for a lot of the stuff on there. So it was a finesse.
But it's always important to remember that it's not about the capitalistic side of it, right? That's always going to be it's always going to be a component of all this shit until we decide to destroy capitalism. But it is the personnel in those buildings at the time that know that are going to take advantage of that sort of whatever the larger money-making ploy is to make something that is quality cultural product. Right. And, like you were saying before about getting more Black execs in the space, I think it's always important to not just make sure that there are more people there that are actually connected to the culture in a real way. I think that the 90s, especially those soundtracks are a testament to like great A&Rs, right. People that understood like, oh, I'm going to watch this and turn this into this whole thing, this cultural conversation, whether it be the Above the Rim soundtrack or something like that. And
artists that were willing to give their best work to these soundtracks.
Yeah, not BS like, record.
A lot of because you knew if like the song was like 17 or 18, number 18 on the soundtrack, that was like a throwaway. But like some artists were giving their best work, and when you go back and you look at artists' catalogs, it doesn't tell the full story. So if like you were to look at, and I think I've said this on Twitter before, if you look at Aaliyah's catalog, she has an album in '96 and then doesn't drop another album until 2001. But what that doesn't show, people might say, well, why didn't she drop an album for 5 years during her height? What it doesn't show is that she, like damn near every summer, had a hit on a soundtrack. And she could just drop that and be good. She could drop, Try Again from the Romeo Must, was that on the Romeo Must Die soundtrack? Like that was a smash. Yeah. Are You That Somebody was on the Dr. Dolittle soundtrack. Like, so, a lot of people were getting off on these soundtracks. They weren't even having to put out full albums. They could just get, regulators or whatever. And that blew Warren G up.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's an amazing time. And I'm always, it doesn't matter that I'm 41 now. I really enjoy having grown up in that space to see the transition. But my last question for you is, what have you learned from hip hop, musically, culturally, whatever, that you use in your everyday life? Maybe as a manager, maybe as a dad, maybe as a whatever.
That's a really good question that nobody has ever asked me that before. I think one thing that hip hop has taught me is like, it's given me so much information that I feel like I would have never learned in a classroom. It was an education. Like there's been so many debates on the timeline lately about, did you learn about Malcolm X in school? Did you learn about Baldwin or any of these different other people? Did you learn about these things? Did you know about Juneteenth? Did you, were these taught in schools? And no, not really. You learned some things, but it was very small. But it's like hip hop taught me a lot about Black history and racism and prejudice that they weren't teaching in schools. Like you could learn about this listening to Brand Nubian or whatever. X-Clan, like I thought that was like fascinating. That's one thing that I learned. Like I had information on this stuff early on that it took a lot of other people years to understand. Oh, this was happening. It's like, how did you listen to rap for 30 years but not know that police brutality was happening against Black people and all? It's like, where were you? Like you were not listening to this stuff. Like, and so it gave me like an education on that I wouldn't have got anywhere else. And it's also like, I feel like hip hop did bring a lot of people together, a lot of different cultures, a lot of different people to celebrate it. And you get to meet a lot of different people throughout your journey. I mean, think of all the people that you've been able to meet in your life doing this. You've been able to see the world doing this. I mean, it's afforded us both like great opportunities to be able to even still be doing this. And, it also teaches you about community and learning how to work with lots of other different people. It's just, I think it's the greatest American art form ever.
Man, I agree. Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for being on the show, man. Thank you.
No, I'm glad we finally made it work. We didn't get to do it in person, but eventually we'll be able to do it in person again sometime. So it's always a pleasure, man. And, you know, thank you for supporting me early on. And, you know, I always thank Knowledge and give a shout out to him for
always
early on. And like, y'all gave me press passes to get in places and get into shows, you know, early on. So I do appreciate that. So thank you.
No, man. Thank you.